Welcome to another episode of Critic.Reading.Writing. My name is Quayson and I am a professor of English at Stanford University. Today's episode will be focused on Walter Mosley's Devil in a Blue Dress. A contrast will be drawn between the observation and deductive methods of the classic detective novel exemplified in Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's The Sign of 4 that we saw last week, and the noir detective novel that we find in Mosley's variant. We shall see how the entire social universe of Ezekiel Rawlins in post-World War II Los Angeles is riddled with corruption at every level, including the police, the politicians, and even the black community of which Easy is a part. The self-assurance of the classic detective is here replaced with the black detective's nervousness about his own personal safety. This affects his processes of detection and interposes a mode of personal alertness into the way in which he goes about solving the mystery. The noir detective form then allows Mosley to launch a critique of racist hegemonic society, while also helping us to empathize with the woes and tribulations of the black detective while he attempts to simultaneously solve the mystery and also secure some form of financial and personal safety for himself. Devil in a Blue Dress gives us a completely different example of the detective novel and his world than we saw in Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's The Sign of 4 from last week. Unlike that example of the classic detective novel, Devil in a Blue Dress gives us all the features of the noir novel form. In place of the staid social environment of 19th century London, we see in The Sign of 4 instead a mid-20th century Los Angeles that is teeming with violent gangsters, child abusers and child trafficking, political intrigue and blackmail, and racism and police brutality. The criminal mystery depicted in the novel acts almost like a smoke screen for other kinds of personal treacheries by women, acquaintances, and even close allies and friends whenever the opportunity presents itself. Rawlins is 28 years old, and his character is based on doubt, unease, and essential suspiciousness about people's motivations toward him. As we come to see, the feelings of vertigo, fear, and anger that he often expresses are the products of a long history and his sense of racial entrapment in Los Angeles. In the first great migrations from the end of the 19th century to roughly the 1930s, large numbers of African Americans moved to northeastern and midwestern cities such as Detroit, New York, Chicago, Boston, and others in pursuit of jobs in the new manufacturing industries. World War II and the end of the 1940s brought the second Great Migration, but this time to the West Coast in response to recruitment into the defense industries that emerged to service the war effort. Black people came to Los Angeles from places such as Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas, and Texas. The black population in Los Angeles dramatically increased from approximately 63,700 in 1940 to about 350,000 in 1965, rising from 4% to roughly 14% of the total population in the period. But the rise in the percentage of the black population in Los Angeles was not accompanied by equitable social arrangements in housing, access to social spaces, and even the kinds of jobs that were made available to others. Racial tensions were also not entirely uncommon. The Zoot Suit riots were a series of conflicts that took place between June 3rd and 18th in 1943 Los Angeles. They pitted white servicemen against young black and Mexican American city residents. The servicemen and Zoot Suiters in LA were both immediately identifiable by the way they dressed. Some servicemen and others in the community felt that the continued wearing of Zoot suits represented the youth's public flouting of cloth rationing regulations. The conflict started when the white servicemen began attacking and stripping youths of their Zoot suits, which were thought to be made of too much fabric and thus seemingly unpatriotic in the context of World War II. The much later LA riots were a series of riots and civil disobediences that took place in April and May of 1992 after 4 officers of the LAPD were acquitted by a trial jury of using excessive force in the videotaped arrest and beating of Rodney King. The riots spread throughout Los Angeles metropolitan area, with thousands of people joining in over a 6-day period following the verdict. The entire story in Devil in a Blue Dress is told from a first-person narrative viewpoint, thus welding our perspectives closely to Easy's own interpretations of the unfolding situation and also giving us direct access to his emotional responses both to the mystery that he sets out to solve and also to the social environment that he has to navigate in his work as a private eye. In contrast to Sherlock Holmes, Easy Rawlins is a reluctant detective, and he follows the increasingly labyrinthine thread of the mystery as much to gain some profit and to save himself as to solve the mystery proper. For a black man in post-World War II Los Angeles, the quest for money and the conquest of his fears and anxieties are a direct test of his masculinity, and indeed what make him initially accept to take on the commission from DeWitt Albright, the white man who asks him to find the missing Daphne Monet. The itinerary of the unfolding mystery is very much different from what we found in The Sign of Fall. The first installment of the mystery comes in the charge to Easy to track down Daphne Monet among the black social circles that she favors hanging out in. The inception of the mystery immediately introduces a racial dynamic into play, since Albright is perfectly candid that he is paying Easy Rawlins to essentially be a native informer among his own people. It does not take long for Easy to be personally implicated in the unfolding mystery, as he is identified as a suspect in the brutal death of Coretta, a woman he had a one-night sexual tryst with early in the novel, and who gives him some clues to Daphne Monet's identity. Because he becomes a person of interest to the police, Easy's quest is now as much to clear his own name as it is to find out the whereabouts of the missing Daphne. Easy also finds out pretty quickly in the course of his investigations that DeWitt-Albright is a corrupt fixer working for shady political interests, and that these interests spell an increasingly complex web of political blackmail, intrigue, child trafficking, and various other unsavory details of a corrupt white class interest. The objective of the noir detective novel is not to maintain a semblance of order for the status quo, but rather to radically critique it. As Stephen K. Knight notes in Crime Fiction Since 1800, Detection, Death, Diversity, about the noir detective genre in general, the persistent personification of the private eye form is not so surprising when the heavily individual nature of the subgenre is considered. The private eye operates alone, judges others by himself, shares no one's values and mores, nor even the facts. He rarely detects very much, using his movements, observations, consciousness, and his frequent unconsciousness as his primary method of unraveling a mystery. He is rather an I, and his story is in the first person. Innate rectitude, determination, and bravery are coupled with isolation, and this mechanism is inscribed in the plots in an extraordinarily compulsive feature. Over and over again, the detective is told or realizes that the case on which he has been employed is now over, usually about a quarter or a third of the way through the book. But he always decides to continue with his inquiries to satisfy himself and some personal sense of justice. Though the private eye is a professional, a paid worker like most people, he is not, in the crucial part of the story, an employee. His time, his courage, above all his values, are controlled by himself. He is as far from the real working police and positive social agents as he is from gangsters and their negative social operations. Of special significance in what Stephen Knight lays out here is that the noir detective is himself the subject of doubtful motivations, which in Easy's case is born from his position as a black man in a blatantly racist Los Angeles. At some point, Easy refers to Benny Giacomo, the boss of the airline assembly plant where he used to work, as a plantation boss owner who prefers to see his black workers servile and infantilized. The theme of black servility and infantilization is also to be seen in DeWitt-Albright's attitudes to Easy himself, as well as in those of the two policemen who come to arrest him as part of the investigation into Coretta's death. The policemen beat him mercilessly and detain him without charge, clearly employing the sadistic power they have over him to make him beg for mercy. To add to this essentially racist social environment, in Devil in a Blue Dress, social relationships are also repeatedly reduced to transactional exchanges, so that every relationship is evaluated on the basis of perceived advantage. This essential transactionalism also speaks to the alienated character of Los Angeles society, where the different racial groups and their social strata interact with one another mainly on the basis of a utilitarian calculus. One thing that we see repeated again and again in Devil in a Blue Dress is Rawlins's negotiation of different kinds of gatekeepers and to whom he is forced to credentialize himself before gaining passage. We see an especially egregious example of this early in the novel when he goes for his first appointment at DeWitt Albright's office. And this is what we see. The address Albright had given me was a small buff-colored building in Alvarado. The buildings around it were taller, but not as old or as distinguished. There was nobody around, not even a directory, just a wall of cream-colored doors with no names on them. "Excuse me," the voice made me jump. "What?" My voice strained and cracked as I turned to see the small man. "Who are you looking for?" He was a little white man wearing a suit that was also a uniform. "I am looking for, I started. I forgot the name. I had to squint so that the room wouldn't start spinning. It was a habit I developed in Texas when I was a boy. Sometimes, when a white man of authority would catch me off guard, I'd empty my head of everything, so I was unable to say anything. 'The less you know, the less trouble you find,' they used to say. I hated myself for it, but I also hated white people and colored people too for making me that way." "Can I help you?" the white man asked. He had curly red hair and a pointed nose. When I still couldn't answer, he said, "We only take deliveries between 9 and 6. No, I said, trying to remember. "Yes, we do." "Now you better leave." "No, I mean Easy does get in eventually to see Albright, but only after exchanging some angry words with a security guard, who reluctantly checks through the intercom to ascertain the veracity of Easy's appointment. When he gets to the door of Albright's office proper, he is subjected to a humiliating body search by 2 of Albright's goons. The purpose of this second scene is to repeat the formula of credentialization, but at an even higher level of physical discomfort for Easy. The scene outside with the security guard is significant for several reasons, not the least being what we are told of Easy's habit of voiding his mind of anything that might get him into trouble whenever he encountered a white man in a position of authority. He replicates this habit of voiding his mind again when he is arrested by the 2 policemen and taken to the police station for interrogation. But with the policeman, the voiding of his mind is also a form of strategic role-playing that he has long cultivated in response to being racially profiled several times by the police. The episode with the security guard may also be read from the perspective of W.E.B. Du Bois's concept of double consciousness that he introduces in his groundbreaking The Souls of Black Folk. By double consciousness, Du Bois sought to illustrate the inward doubleness that is experienced by Black people in America in response to racial oppression and their denigration in hegemonic white society. The doubleness comes from having to see oneself simultaneously from the perspective of one's own needs and desires, as well as from the viewpoint of the denigrating white world. The doubleness then shapes both the Black person's interiority as well as his or her behavior in the social world. However, as we saw from our episode on Frantz Fanon's Black Skin, White Masks, it is also possible for double consciousness in a highly racialized and racist society to also generate a mode of interpretative alertness and superlative hyper-awareness for the Black person, such that the condition can also be turned into a form of liberatory consciousness. In Easy's case, what we see as the product of his double consciousness is his psychological voiding that comes with an uneasy combination of contradictory feelings and emotions, including momentary amnesia, vertigo, and anger. This combination turns out to also be a necessary aspect of his wider ambient emotional awareness whenever he finds himself in a white social environment. Thus, when he is released from the police station later on, it is almost nightfall and he has 17 blocks to traverse to get to his house in Watts. But he thinks to himself that it would be risky to jog home all the way because of the automatic suspicion that he might draw to himself as a Black man running part of the way through a white neighborhood at that time of day. As we saw in our episode on the sign of 4, this consciousness of always being potentially out of place within the dominant social world is completely alien to Sherlock Holmes, who not only traverses social spaces with extreme confidence, but is also able to take on the disguise and social markers of people from different social classes whenever it suits him. This is clearly not a luxury that Easy Rawlins can afford, because as a Black man, he's always seen and automatically profiled by the white world before he's heard, so that the very traversal of white spaces, no matter how apparently ordinary, is always fraught with a sense of personal danger for him. Another key feature of Devil in a Blue Dress is the nature and function of the chronotopes that are used to structure the plot. As we saw in our episode on the chronotope of the airport, chronotopes bring together spatial and temporal indices into a unified space-time whole. Chronotopes may be divided into those of aggregation, such as parlors, cafes, drinking bars, and malls, and those of disaggregation, such as airports, railway stations, subways, and so on. Mixed chronotopes with contradictory aggregative and disaggregative features include the residential university, which, as we saw, is organized according to contrasting rhythms. In Devil in a Blue Dress, the most important chronotope is that of John's speakeasy, where Easy goes to start tracking down Daphne Monet. As Easy tells it, John's place was a speakeasy before they repealed prohibition, meaning also that it had had a long-standing social significance for the black community of Watts. It is important to note also that from approximately 1920 to roughly 1955, this area of Watts was part of the longer Central Avenue and at the heart of the African American cultural community in Los Angeles. The jazz legend Charles Mingus was born and raised largely in Watts. The area had lively R&B and jazz music scenes, with many famous jazz and blues acts playing at different joints. The live band featured in John's Speakeasy in the novel is thus reminiscent of a real part of black history in Los Angeles. John's Speakeasy was entered through the back door of a little market at the corner of Central Avenue and 9th Place. Because the speakeasy was often filled with people from Houston in Texas, which was Easy's own hometown, being at John's felt like you were back home in Houston, dreaming about California. In other words, John's Speakeasy was the guarantor of dreams and expectations, even if the outside world contradicted these fundamentally for black people. As an example of a modern variant of the chronotope of the parlor, the chapters set in John's Speakeasy introduce various dramatis personae into the story, along with the complication of plot threads. It is at the speakeasy that Easy meets with Coretta, who takes him home with her along with her boyfriend Dupree, who has completely passed out from drinking too much at the joint. But it is here too that we briefly encounter Frank Green, the bootlegger par excellence, who has the reputation also of being extremely deadly with a knife. Frank Green later pays Easy a surprise visit at his home when he learns that Easy has been asking around about him. Easy originally expresses an interest in finding out more about Frank Green because he has been seen several times with Daphne Monet and is assumed to be her boyfriend. It is only toward the end of the novel that we discover that Frank is actually Daphne's brother from New Orleans, where they both grew up in the hands of an abusive father. But Easy is not to know this at the speakeasy itself. The intrigue and possible plot lines introduced at the speakeasy serve to intensify the plot, and indeed, from this point on, almost everyone we meet was first introduced to us at the joint. The chronotope of the speakeasy then serves as an important organizational principle for the plot in general, acting as the space for the introduction of social heterogeneity, a significant black social hub, as well as the source of plot digressions and entanglements. As we noted in last week's episode, in The Sign of Four, Sherlock Holmes is a completely dispassionate detective driven primarily by what he repeatedly declares to be the scientific, rational principles of observation and deduction that are heavily buttressed by a mass of mundane pieces of information. Contrastively, because Easy is himself a suspect in a murder, his motivation first to find Daphne and the $30,000 it turns out she has stolen from her politician boyfriend, and then also to clear his name, decisively converts his pursuit of the entangled mystery web into a quest story. And as in other quest stories, a significant chunk of the latter part of the novel is given to his passage through a putative underworld of prostitutes, maimed and demented black people, and a sundry collection of eccentrics in different locations. But the other objective of this journey through the underworld is also to expose us to the exigencies of the white working classes and the black underclasses of Los Angeles, for whom life is a series of negotiations on the knife edge of existence, with every moment threatening the potential for utter implosion. While Easy is finding out information, he is also being invited to bear witness to another and even more endangered facet of blackness. For Walter Mosley, Chester Himes, Pauline E. Hopkins, Ishmael Reed, and other writers of the black detective novel, the noir form is one of social critique that is especially attuned to race, class, and other modes of fraught identities in America. And even though we read much of these novels for entertainment, we must also not forget the contradictions of the societies that they help to illuminate. Thank you very much. Please remember to check the reading suggestions in the episode description. And if you like this episode, give a thumbs up, subscribe and share, hit the notifications bell so that you do not miss out on any upcoming episodes. And enter your comments in the section below. See you next week.